Hello YouTube, welcome back to Kind Heart Homestead. My name is Ben and I'm up here on our off-grid property in the mountains of Virginia. Right behind me is my Ford Ranger pickup truck that I inherited from my grandpa with a trailer that belongs to Angie's mom. And we have our John Deere E130 riding mower, lawn tractor. There's a number of names for these things. But the reason it's up there is because I have to mow the grass regularly at our apartment building, which is just a couple miles that way. And I like to do that every week just to make sure the grass doesn't get too much to handle, because this isn't really meant to be a brush hog. It's meant to mow a lawn. And we've been struggling just a bit with the amount of weeds and volunteer trees that we get in this area. So I do have to be careful, make sure the patches aren't very overgrown before we mow. All the more reason to do our annual maintenance on this mower. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this off the trailer real quick. And we have a lot of maintenance to do. Some of it's obvious, some of it's not so obvious. So stick around if you're interested to learn how to do a DIY service on your riding mower. Let's get started. So the first thing I like to do is get this deck off. If I had some sort of lift, like a mechanic's garage would have, I could definitely lift it up, inspect the underside, remove all the grass and stuff like that. But it's good practice to actually remove the blades and sharpen them. And since there's so much accumulated grass and gunk in the deck, it's better to just take it off anyway. And it's just held in with a series of hooks and pins. So let me go ahead and pull all those out and see if I can get this off. I don't know what these are called. I just call them pins, but it's like a giant thick gauge paper clip that keeps tension on the peg that it's on. And there's also a washer that helps anything from slipping. So I'm just going to set those here so I don't lose them. And I'm going to move on and pull those off of all three attachment points before I start to lower it. Just to clarify, there's actually 5 points of contact where the deck is suspended from the rest of the mower. 3 of them are that galvanized metal color. There's 2 beefy eye hooks in the back, and there's 1 central bar in the front that it hangs from. And then in between those, there's these 2 black painted pieces of metal. It's like a flat metal stock that it hangs from as well. That's a bit harder to see and harder to show because it's in the shade there. Being black in the shade is not very conducive for a YouTube video. All right, as you can see here, the deck's not actually as covered as I thought it would be. I did clean it last year, and it probably hasn't had enough time to really accumulate much since then. And also, this year's been a bit unusual, and that our summer's been pretty dry. So I haven't actually had to mow this every week, at least here on our homestead, as much as previous years. But as you can see here, the bright green neon paint is well worn off of these blades. They are a bit dull, probably from hitting all these rocks that we have around here that kind of come to the surface. So what I need to do is get these nuts off so I can sharpen the blades with a paddle sander on my grinder. And that's basically like a circle, kind of like a grinding wheel, but instead of it being a rigid piece that grinds, it's a bunch of loose pieces of sandpaper that kind of flap around, and it'll allow me to sharpen it. And it's going to be a lot easier to do with the blades off. And once I get the blades off, I can re-grease all of the fittings. I can scrape the rest of this accumulated grass off. And then, of course, get rid of all of this fluff. Maybe for good measure, I can pressure wash this or at least rinse it off before I put it back on. But that's only the deck here. There's a lot more to do. Ooh, this belt's getting old. I've never replaced it. Maybe I'll need to do that. But we need to do the oil change, lubricate, grease some of these fittings as well. Part of the oil change is replacing the oil filter. And while I'm at it, I should go ahead and replace the fuel filter as well, maybe even the air filter. If I had a leaf blower, I could easily blow off the loose grass after each mow before it accumulates and gets wet and gets caked in there and all that stuff. But I don't have a leaf blower, and I don't have the appropriate type of wand that would go to an air compressor to really get in there and to blow it out. So my only real solution is to clean it off once a year when I do my annual maintenance, and that's been working pretty well so far, but you can see there's pretty deep accumulation on there. I don't want to get too carried away cleaning this because I'm going to reveal a lot more filth once I remove these caps, but I'm just removing the amount of grass necessary to expose the hexagonal heads of the bolts that hold these plastic caps onto the deck itself. So as you can see here, I have a pretty small socket. I don't really remember what the size is, but I'm sure every lawnmower is going to have different size bolts. You just need to go out there with a full socket set like I did and review, and you can take notes for next time if you want, but I find it's easier to just bring this out here, and I'm pretty good at guessing what size socket fits on a bolt. But each of these only has maybe 2 or 3 maximum bolts that are holding this down. I believe the point of this is to try to keep some of that filth off of the belt, but it is pretty accumulated on here, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of the stuff is actually getting caught in the belt. I should probably do a better job keeping this clean, but until I get a hold of a leaf blower or figure out some sort of other technology to keep this clean, it's probably just going to stay dirty like this. Just make sure you put the bolts somewhere where you won't lose them. I like to keep mine in the little socket tray that my sockets came in, but if you don't have one of those, you could use a cup or a magnet or any number of things. I was planning to give the deck a preliminary rinse with this little wand here, and then come back and pressure wash it later like I've done in the past. However, we haven't used the pressure washer here on our off-grid property in Virginia. The last time we used it was back in Raleigh, and it seems that some rodents have been nesting in or around it, and they've chewed through the electrical cable where it winds up and gets stowed into the body of the pressure washer. So I don't have time to diagnose and repair that right now, but later on I can cut that cord and splice on a fresh segment of wire. I don't really want to get all wet working on a saturated deck, so I have that leaned up against the truck drying while I move on to some other maintenance on this mower. All right, I got that trim panel off. I think that just tries to keep dust out of this engine compartment. Anyway, I'm trying to keep this kind of like a live speed for you guys to show that it doesn't actually take too long. Once you can get into the engine compartment, you'll find this little cork which caps off your oil. I didn't show this on camera, but under those 2 wheels, I put a 2x4 scrap. That way, it's either level or slightly angled towards the spout. What I don't want to do is have it angled the other way, because then old oil will probably settle in there somehow. I don't know that for sure, but it makes sense to me. And all around this workspace, I have a bunch of extra materials. If you have a block of wood or something, you can actually just drive your mower right up onto it to angle it in whatever direction you see fit. So I have some old empty engine oil containers, or motor oil rather, because I changed my own oil in my truck, my Prius, and Angie's car, and now I'm doing the mower. The only thing you really have to have here is some sort of funnel, because that cork is so close to the frame that if you don't angle it away and if you don't use a funnel, it's going to pool up there. So I think what I usually do is I jam this up under there and angle this down towards the container. So let's see if I can get that going. Just getting some of this dirt and debris off of here because I don't want it getting back into the oil. And I also want to make sure that when I take this cap off, I'm ready with the funnel, and a lot of this grime could get in the way. All right. So with mine, I turn it like an eighth to the right. When I pull the cap off, let's see how smoothly I can do this. Ooh, it's really stuck in there. I have some pliers. Let's see if it'll give me better grip. Got it. Got a couple drops on the ground. Could definitely be worse. But you can see I have the tall part of the funnel really wedged up under there. And now that's just going to sit. I have the deck over there drying just behind the camera. It's in the sun. I still need to get the proper tools out to get those blades removed. But at least for the next couple hours, I'm just going to let this sit and keep draining. There's no reason to rush this because I don't want any of this old oil in there. And this machine actually takes the same type of oil as my car, 5W30. But if you check the manual, there's actually 4 different thicknesses of oil that it can use, and it depends on the operating temperature. It doesn't get super hot here. I think the hottest it gets is in the low 90s in the summer. So I don't need to put the oil in that makes this be able to run comfortably at like 120, 130, whatever. And I also don't mow during the winter. We might use the machine a couple times to pull a wagon, but I'm not too concerned about actually running the blade, running with high throttle. So after this drains, we're going to move on to the filter.
Here's a close-up of the little nipple that the cap was once on that holds back the oil. You can see there's a small little gasket on there, and the only time I ever look at this is annually when I drain the oil.
Well, I took a break for lunch while the oil drained. It looks like it's done dripping now, so I'm going to take off this other panel, which is the same as the one on that side, and that's because the oil filter is on this side. All right, now I have the special tool for removing oil filters. I got this, I think at Walmart. It's probably the cheapest remover they have, and it kind of expands to different size ones. It's a bit tricky to use, but at least it was cheap. Let me see if I can get this off without any issue. There we go.
The annoying thing about this tool is also the benefit of the tool, which is that it expands automatically to any size oil filter that you might have, as long as it's cylindrical. I'm not sure if other industries have different shapes, but in automotive and lawnmowers, they're all roughly cylindrical with kind of a weird corrugated, lumpy looking edge, and that's where the fingers on these things really grab. In the past, I've used a number of different tools, including channel lock pliers, which tend to really just crush the oil filter. This one does remove it a lot cleaner, and I get to use whatever handle for my socket wrenches I have lying around. So I can use the extension if it's in a hard-to-reach place. I can use it flush if I don't have much clearance. And I don't have to buy different ones for the different size filters that we use here on our homestead. The only real challenge about it is dealing with very small oil filters like this. I think Angie's car also has a very skinny one. It's pretty much at the minimum for the sizes that this tool can grab. And the smaller it is, the less it grabs. So I can use one hand and really hold those fingers around the filter snugly, while the other hand, I'm really torquing it using the handle. If anyone has a better recommendation for a tool, let me know. A strap wrench is not going to work because I can't actually access this filter from the side. So unless I want to buy one of those like non-mechanical cup tools for each size filter I deal with, I think this is the only option I have. But if you're in the automotive industry and you remove these oil filters all day, let me know down in the comments what the easiest tool is to use. So what I'm working on now is the fuel filter. This just has a small paper filter in it that keeps the sediment out of your engine, anything that might have been introduced in the fuel tank when you're filling it up, like leaf particles and stuff like that. This old one was really stuck in here, and even though it's just a friction fit, I had to pretty much use all of my strength in both hands with pliers trying to spin it around to pop the ends free. I've heard it's good practice to replace this annually, and I ordered a kit that actually came with the spark plug, the oil filter, and the air filter. It was a pretty nice find because it was cheaper on Amazon to get that combo kit than it was to buy each individual piece separately. So the next thing is the air filter. You can see there's these two little wing nut slash thumb screws that I simply pull out. And I've never actually replaced the air filter on this before. We've had it for probably 5 years, 6 years by now. It's probably overdue, so since I got that kit, I'll go ahead and replace it. For some reason, the kit came with 2 spark plugs, but I only need 1. And I already have a spark plug removal tool because I also use this tool on my Prius. And I'm able to pop out one of the spark plugs just by unscrewing it, and then I get the other one put back in. Just make sure you don't forget to replace the wire that completes the circuit.
All right, so I have a bit of an unconventional method for removing the blades from my mower deck. I like to get a scrap block of wood, shove it in somewhere so the blade cannot spin. I don't want this moving around and potentially injuring me. So once I put counterclockwise pressure on this nut here, it's really going to bottom out that board and prevent this from spinning. And I don't actually have the appropriate socket size to do this with the correct tool. So what I like to use is a pipe wrench. So let's get going.
I go for this pipe wrench every time a bolt or a nut is really stuck, and this is no exception. I like to keep these pretty tight because I'm paranoid about them flying off and hitting something. I found myself doing a lot more plumbing projects over the past few years than I ever imagined, and that's why I have this pipe wrench. And it's good that I'm getting some extra use out of it because pipe wrenches are expensive. You can save a few dollars getting tools like this from Harbor Freight. I definitely recommend that if you only need it for 1 or 2 jobs. But I actually have a few different sized pipe wrenches, which comes in handy for doing plumbing projects too.
Well, I got one off. I'm not sure what's happening with this other one, but I'm going to figure it out off camera.
So it turns out there's a 7-point star, which acts as a locking mechanism to keep this blade rotating with the associated bolt that comes down from the belt. Here's a close-up of what I'm talking about. You can see the blade itself. It's really stripped off, but it's even more stripped on the hub where the bolt comes through. The belts are supposed to rotate this, and the blade is supposed to move with that bolt. But at some point, I bet I hit a rock, and it really just jumped the blade, skipped it around, and now it's compromised. And I don't think there's a way to replace that bolt that goes all the way through. It would definitely be some sort of proprietary part if it is available, but I decided to just replace the entire assembly because they're pretty affordable on Amazon, but I'm only going to replace that one. So what should have been a pretty basic disassembly turned out to become a very annoying manual process because I snapped my 10mm socket after 30 years of use. This is my first and only socket set that I received as a child, and I finally just now have to start replacing the individual sockets as they break, it turns out. This would have been a great use of a deep impact rated socket and an impact driver. But since I don't have that stuff nearby, I had to get creative with a small handled wrench and a hammer. You can see I'm hammering it onto the head so it fits snugly, but sometimes it gets a bit too snug and then I have to remove it with a hammer. So I took that apart just to make sure I knew exactly how to put it back together, but now I have to wait a few more days for the Amazon order to arrive with a replacement part. In the meantime, let's go ahead and add some new motor oil since the cap is back on and since the oil filter has been installed. I'm mixing and matching brands here because I had 1 quart unopened and then I had another 5-quart bag in a box from Walmart that had a bit of oil left in it from my last Toyota Prius oil change. They're both conventional oil. Since it's a like type, I figured it's fine to mix and match it like that. And just like a car, the dipstick shows you the oil levels. So let's move on to the sharpening of the blades. I mentioned that I have this fancy type of sanding adapter for my angle grinder. I bought this contraption several years ago for the sole purpose of sharpening lawnmower blades, and I haven't actually used it for anything else. I would say it's a bit safer to use than the traditional cutoff wheel, but it still will produce sparks, so I recommend wearing safety glasses if you're not used to the tool yet. So I put away the sharpened blades for later. I have to make sure they don't stay out because we have a toddler who's very curious about everything tractor related. And now it's time to hose off the rest of the mower. The deck itself is still drying off in the background. It's relatively clean. Now I'm just getting any accumulated grass out of any of the little hatches and compartments of the mower, including the under the hood area below the steering wheel. I'm just making sure to aim low so I don't get water on the battery terminals. Now I need to raise up the lawnmower to remove at least one of the back wheels. And just to be safe, I'm going to put this jack stand underneath, and I have the parking brake on. I like to use a tamping bar to get some leverage so I don't actually need to get a jack out. Here's another purchase I made. It's inner tube specifically designed for the rear tires of my lawnmower. Why do I need these, you might ask? I have tubeless wheels, but they've been leaking slowly for the past few years. And instead of refilling the air every time I want to mow, I decided to save some money on a tire replacement and put in inner tubes. I've never done this before, but people online have suggested that as long as the treads are in good shape, this is the way to go. I watched a couple YouTube videos on how to install inner tubes on a tire without completely removing the tire from the hub assembly. The first step that I learned about was to first deflate the tire. That's pretty easy and quick with a valve stem removal tool, which is a cheap tool I got on Amazon. But now that there's no air in the tire, I need to figure out how to break the seal where the hub and the tire meet. I believe this is typically called the bead. I have to break the bead, and I'm just using whatever pointy tools that I have around. I don't want to get something razor sharp like a chisel because that could destroy the rubber, but I'm just using these wrenches because they're sufficiently rounded over on the edges, and I can still really pull and get some good leverage behind it without breaking the tool. So as you can see now, I broke that bead, I got a tool under the rubber, and now I'm just trying to figure out how to hold that position while I continue to remove more and more of that overlap, moving all the way around the hub. I believe auto mechanics typically use a machine to do this, and that would be a lot easier, and you'll see me struggle for the next few minutes really trying to figure out how to get this off. So I finally just realized that I don't have the strength to hold one wrench in a spot while pulling the other wrench around the hub with the other hand. There's just too much friction opposed from the rubber, and it's really grabbing onto the wrench. So I had to bring in a larger tool, which is a hammer with a claw on the back. I figured the claw could get under the rubber pretty easily, but then when I rotate the hammer sideways, which is easy to do with the leverage that I get from my body weight, then I can gradually start to pull that overlap over the top. One thing that surprised me about the instructions on how to install these inner tubes is I actually have to permanently cut off the valve nipple, and this doesn't actually go anywhere on the other side. It just terminates onto a large rubber washer gasket looking thing. So the other end just fell in there and I had to reach in and get it. Pulling the rubber away from the hub, there was barely enough room to get my hand in there, so there should be enough space to get that inner tube in as well. The YouTube instructions said to have a spray bottle filled with soapy water, so you could lubricate this inner tube as well as the tire and the hub while you're trying to slide these components past each other. I didn't have any empty, clean spray bottles around, so I'm just using a bucket with like a gallon or two of soapy water in it. And I figured once I deflate these inner tubes, I can actually dunk the whole thing in the water. I just have to make sure not to let any water get into the little valve stem there. As you can see, it's actually working very easily. The inner tube is a lot more pliable than that rigid rubber on the outside of the hub, and I knocked that out in like a minute, but as you can see now, the problem I'm having is trying to seat the rubber tire back onto the hub itself. People online tend to use a vise in conjunction with vise grips or some sort of other clamps. I don't really have that stuff on hand, so I'm trying my best to just brute force it. And even though this is a small tire, I do not have the strength to seat this rubber all the way back around. One idea I had was to crush the tire with this ratchet strap that seems to release some of the tension on the top. But as you can see, I have it strapped to the mower, and it's actually not strong enough to sit flat and allow me to really put my body weight behind these tools. Now I'm trying a flathead in conjunction with some pliers. Nothing is working, so I need to figure out something else. So let's see what I come up with next. So I went ahead and took the ratchet strap off, and I'm trying to strap it a bit lower on the mower to see if it holds better. It doesn't. So the only other thing I can think of is to stand on the tire with my body weight. So I brought it over to the trailer. I'm still using this one clamp, but as you can see, my body weight in conjunction with that strap was enough to really pull that rubber down around the hub. And now all I have to do is inflate this tire. So I'm using this AC powered tire inflator that I have, and I'm not exactly sure what the PSI is supposed to be for these inner tubes. I didn't see any literature that came with them, so I'm filling it based on the max PSI for these tires, which says 10 PSI on the rubber itself. So I decided to do this one wheel at a time, and I left the mower jacked up on top of this stand. So now we can go ahead and put the tire back on. I need to go find the little washer and the C-clamp that allows it to lock on. There's also this little debris cover that keeps stuff out of the grease. One thing I noticed, though, is there's actually no grease fittings for the back wheels, so I don't know if I'm supposed to manually shove some grease in there or not. Maybe later, after I finish this video, I can do more research on that and see if I need to open it back up and put some grease on a finger and just like shove it in that hole. But now it's time to switch to the other wheel. So using some leverage and this iron tamping rod, I'm able to easily lift the mower up. The problem is it's difficult to hold the mower in place with one hand while getting the jack stand in with the other hand, but it doesn't take long enough to warrant trying to figure out a different solution. So now that it's up on this stand, I can easily pull this wheel off the same way I did with the other one. I just get rid of that C-clamp and then everything pops right off. Just make sure you do not lose that C-clamp, because nothing's going to prevent the wheel from falling right off the mower if you don't have that. And now back to the main struggle I have here, which is dealing with this rubber on the hub. So this one was surprisingly more difficult than the first one to get off of the hub. But once I did that, I was able to easily get that inner tube in place. And now I bypassed all that other hassle and went straight to the trailer. And using the experience from the first one, I was able to make short work of this process. And now the last step before adding this wheel back onto the mower is to add some air to it. This one took a bit longer. I think I had the wrong angle on this fitting here, and the air was actually just blowing out into the world instead of going into the inner tube. But once I got that angle addressed, you can see that it inflated right up. For this wheel, I wanted to give you guys a bit of a close-up so you can actually understand what this little C-clamp mechanism is. First, there's a washer that goes on, and I think that prevents the C-clamp from deteriorating over time. The washer is probably a thicker gauge and stronger metal. And then the C-clamp, if you had strong enough fingers, you could probably just pop that right in. I like to use the flat end of a pair of pliers. And then there's this little shroud that goes over. And I'll go ahead and tell you that after I assembled this and turned the mower on, it would not drive. It turns out that there's this little locking pin. It's kind of like a square tube or square rod made out of metal. And it's supposed to slide into this little notch carved into the axle. And what it does is it bridges the gap between the axle and the hub, and it prevents the hub from freely spinning around the axle. That way, when you use the gas, the back axle will turn and it'll bring the wheels with it. So I didn't actually know about these pins until I looked up online why the mower wouldn't drive. And I found those little pins sitting on the ground just under where the wheels were. They had fallen in the grass and they didn't get far. So you need to make sure you put them with the C-clamp when you take the wheels apart. So now I'm going to use some leverage with this tamping bar once more. I have to remember to lift one side instead of the middle because I'm only trying to remove the stand from one side. So I'm careful to just kind of knock that out of the way real quick. I don't want to leave my arm under there longer than I need to because this thing could fall at any time. I've used this technique so many times to lift so many different things like the chicken coop. I'm very comfortable doing this. But if you had some sort of shop or garage, you could simply buy a floor jack. They sell them at Harbor Freight as well. And then you could just lift this up from the middle and you could remove both wheels at once. I'm looking for more stuff to do while I'm waiting for the belt to arrive for the mower deck. So let's go ahead and grease the front fittings. I have this tiny little grease gun, and the reason I got that is because I once had a larger grease gun, and I found that when I leave grease sitting in it, it gets all over all of my tools and anything in the vicinity of where I store this. So I upgraded to a miniature grease gun, and that's it here in the video, and it takes these tiny little grease capsules, and I find that one of these capsules is enough to grease all of the fittings and then be depleted, so then I can store this empty instead of full of grease. I think part of the reason it used to leak so much is because we are in that Raleigh heat, up in the 100 degrees Fahrenheit over the summer, and it probably melts everything that's out there, and we did not store this in a climate-controlled environment. But as you can see here, there's 2 grease fittings per front wheel, and then there's also a central grease fitting there under the center of the mower, basically underneath the engine. I don't know exactly what it does, but I looked up the diagram and I'm greasing all the fittings. One thing I just got from Amazon was this new spindle here. I think that's the proper term for it. After I install this, it'll have one of those big discs on top that can receive the belt. But until then, all I have to do is install these 4 replacement bolts that it came with. I did keep the old ones on hand just in case I needed them, but I didn't. This came with all of its own bolts and fittings. So there's going to be 4 bolts that hold it to the deck itself. Then there's this one nut on the top that secures it to the wheel. And then there's going to be another one underneath that secures it to a blade using the 7-point star. And I'll show you that in a minute. Unfortunately, since the pressure washer is malfunctioning, I need to scrape off some of this excessive grass caking with a flathead screwdriver. I typically wouldn't worry too much about this, but I just wanted to make sure nothing was going to interfere with the blade installation. I want them to be nice and tight. But as you can see here, now that I got that new 7-point star in there to lock in the blade, I can just step on the wrench using my body weight and nothing's going to spin. And now, what you've all been waiting for is the belt replacement. I actually have to look up a diagram of how this belt threads around these little discs on top of the deck every time I disassemble the deck. because it's very easy to tangle these up in the wrong way, and I want to make sure everything's correct before I put these little caps on. I have put the caps on before when the belt was in the wrong position, and I've learned from that mistake, so I recommend you do the same. Look up a diagram, make sure it's perfect, so you only have to reassemble this once. It's honestly not too hard to get these bolts in and out when the deck is off the mower, but once you put it back on, you're not going to want to take it back off to fix any mistakes. And speaking of installing the deck, it's time to do that now. So I'm going to drive the mower in reverse, close to the deck, just because the deck is heavy and difficult to move around. And all I have to do is straddle the deck and slide it with one firm push right under the mower. So I realized you guys never really got a close-up of how the deck attaches to the mower. And this is a very tight space, and it's hard to get a good camera angle. But to the right, just out of the frame, there's a horizontal wheel, and that's where the engine attaches to the belt. And then that belt goes straight to the deck, and you can see it's kind of sagging right now because the deck is on the ground. But once I raise it up, that belt will be more or less horizontal. There's these two black flat stock bars that kind of guide the mower deck up and down as I raise and lower it. And then the little eye hook thing, you can see I just hung that up on the left. You can't actually install it like that hanging. You have to take it off, turn it sideways, put it through this little hole here, and that way it's locked in and can't come out. And then you hang it on this little peg that's sticking out of the frame. And once all that's done, all I have to do is add this brake line. It's kind of like a brake line on a bike. And I don't know if all mowers have this, but in my model, once you disengage the blade, it automatically brakes under the tension of a spring. So now that the deck is on and I can freely raise it and lower it as needed, it's time to put the two cover plates back on the sides of the engine. I could have done this earlier, but I just had all of these little trim pieces sitting in a pile, and I kind of forgot about them until now. So here's the big reveal. I'm going to drive past the camera slowly so you can see how everything's assembled. And all I'm really planning to do now is pull it up on top of the trailer, just because we don't have any sort of paved flat spots. And I just want to measure the clearance from the deck to the ground and make sure it's all adjusted correctly before I start mowing.
All right, everyone, that concludes the process. I successfully completed the maintenance on my John Deere E130 riding mower. This is more maintenance than I've ever done at one time. I was able to keep the mower disassembled for about 5 days because the first day, once I noticed that belt was frayed, I went ahead and ordered some other things from Amazon, and I just had to wait for them all to get in. And for some reason, Amazon doesn't put them all in one box, even if you order them all the same day from Amazon as a seller. So that belt just came in, so I just got that installed just in time to finish up this video for tomorrow's schedule. I like to release my videos on Friday mornings just because I've heard that a consistent release schedule is a good idea if you want to get more subscribers on YouTube. So if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. You can expect more DIY related videos. We have a homestead here. We're on 10 acres off-grid. We have a camper. We have solar systems, well, septic. We have gardening videos. We have a lot of food preservation and food production videos. We just butchered and froze our first batch of meat birds. Go back to our last couple of videos if you want to see that. And if you have any feedback, feel free to leave it down in the comments below. We definitely want to hear other potential homesteaders who have interest in this sort of thing explain to us what exactly they want to see, and we're happy to try new things and put it on YouTube for you. But also, if you have the experience, leave comments down below to see what kind of improvements we can make. Or if you just simply do it a different way, let us know, because we'd love to compare and contrast. The whole point of this video was to show you that without any sort of formal training or career path, you can go through and maintain your own vehicles. I do my own oil changes, like I mentioned before, so that's nothing new, but I am a bit mechanically inclined. All you really need is a socket set, and you can kind of take apart the mower You might need some other tools here and there, like trying to get those tires off the hub. I wouldn't recommend that without the proper tools. But if you're on a budget like us, you might need to do this sort of thing. If you have tools on hand, but you don't have a lot of money, you should learn these skills. If you have the money and you have the time, what I'd recommend is you just buy new wheels, because they sell them on Amazon for pretty cheap. I think it's like maybe $100 for 2 of them, maybe for the front wheels. I think the back wheels might be a bit more expensive. Anyway, I'm just kind of rambling on now, but I need to wrap up this video now and finish editing it, get it uploaded in time for you guys to watch. See you next time.